Well, we just finished in December a series where we used Galatians 4 and 5 to look at it. What for me, I don't know, I found was a very exciting look at what God did for us through Christmas, and what it might have been like for us, what it might be like if we still lived under the law, if Christmas had never happened, and these things that He did through His birth and then death and resurrection. It struck me how many things I take for granted, having either lived as a non-Christian with not a Jew, but basically a Gentile, so really no knowledge or belief in God, then going straight into the good news of Christ. I just really took for granted, well, yeah, you're brought to Christ, Christian, you're told, yeah, you can pray to God and talk to God, and you don't need priests to do it for you, and this and that, and I never even realized what it might have been like to have lived under the law, and that fear of God, and the sacrifices, and the distance from God, and all of that. And I don't know, for me that teaching really, this was awesome. I really found it refreshing, and I found myself reflecting on it a lot in December as things came up in my life or others' lives, just going back to what Christmas really means for us. And I hope it blessed you guys as well. And we saw that not just were we redeemed from the law, not just purchased with Christ's life from death, it wasn't to settle some score or God did out of obligation. But it tells us He did it because He loves us. And He did it as a plan from before the foundation of the earth. And it told us He did it because He wanted to adopt us as His children. To have us as His family. Because He loves us. And you and I, when we surrender our life into His lordship, when we give up the throne of our life, this isn't just, remember, the Bible talks about even demons believe God exists and they tremble. This isn't about just believing God or even just simply He died on a cross and rose from the dead. The demons know He did that as well. But when we get off the throne of our heart, and we finally step off and say, here, I give you the lordship of my life. I give you the government of my life. When we do that, we are born and given life in His kingdom, His rule. And we are adopted. We are joined to Him. We are made alive. And He comes and He lives in us. He indwells us. We have unlimited and confident access to Him. He says, I will never leave you or forsake you. And not only do we become His child by adoption and relationship, but we are given His name, His authority, His life spirit comes in us, the fruit of His Spirit, His joy, His peace, all become available to us. They become ours by right. We become joint heirs with Him of all the Father's riches, spiritual blessings. We become His children. Yesterday was January 1st, right? Right. Eric's brilliant. It's traditionally a time when people kind of look back, maybe, and look ahead. We reflect and look ahead, maybe make plans, goals, hopes. My guess is each of us approach 2022 with different things. Some are planning weddings. Some, looking with excitement. Some are looking at loved ones who are struggling and hurting. Some approach with fear. Some are limping into 2022. Some are skipping into it. But we're all looking ahead. My guess is we all have hopes. We all have some level of plans we're making. We all setting some goals. And as God's children, I think it's appropriate for us to ask, what should the goals of my life be? What should this look like as I am looking ahead, making plans, building hopes? What makes a life a success? These are questions I think as Christians are worthy of our examination. We are the temple of God's life. He dwells in us. We are His image bearers on earth. We are His light, He says. You're the light of the world. We are custodians of the good news of great joy, that is Christmas. We wield His name and His authority. Our lives have the potential for huge impact. You think about the things I just said. We have God dwelling in us. His name, His authority. We carry His image. We bear His light. And we are custodians of His good news on this earth. Our lives have potential for tremendous impact. Our decisions matter. The goals we set, the plans we make, the hopes we lay in, they matter. I've shared this before, but you watch movies and there's this fascination people have with time travel and about going back into the past, right? And this, what's the common theme all the time? Be careful, because any one thing you do might entirely change the future, right? You see that all the time, whether it's Back to the Future or any of these other movies. If you go back and you change one little thing, you can change the entire future. And we think about that, and it resonates with us. We see the logic of it. One turn on a street to the right instead of the left. One looking down at a cell phone instead of missing what just went past. We resonate, and we make movies about that idea, but yet we take so casually our single decisions in this life now. And often don't realize that every decision we make, every goal we set, has tremendous impact and power to change the entire future of us and those around us. Every decision, even the small ones, could seem to be so casual, can utterly change lives for the future, for the good or bad. The Apostle Paul, he wrote to the believers in Rome, and he was talking about the ways of those who don't know God. He's talking about the lost, those who have not come to a knowledge of Christ. This would be, he's talking about you and I before we came to Christ. Before we chose to surrender our lives and the throne of our life to God, back when we were making our own plans, doing it our way, living in our own self-effort, defining our own priorities and values and choices. And Paul says of them, and of us in our past lives as a Christian now, Romans 1:21 and 22. For although they knew God, now this is prefaced by God is so evidenced in creation that all men basically know Him. They just suppress that truth. It says man has no excuse to deny God simply on the evidence of what He has made around us alone. It says, but so they knew God. They did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. He's describing the people that everyone on this earth, everyone who knows there is a God, we know it, we just maybe have pressed it down, but he says in this failure to give honor to God, and honor is to put someone first, put them elevated place in our life. In their failure, it says, they became futile in their thinking. Thinking they were wise. I got this. I can make my plans. I can make my decisions. I got life by the tail. I'm good. It says they're fools. And that was you and I. Just in case we needed that underline the futility of living on our own wisdom, plans, and ways apart from God, Paul then also wrote to the believers in Corinth. And I'm just going to read this one. In 1 Corinthians 3:18-20, he tells them, let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. If any of you thinks, apart from Christ and Christ, the center of your life, your heart, your plans, you think you're smart, you think you've got this life figured out, you think you can handle it on your own, then I suggest you do what the world calls foolish and lay your life at Christ's feet, because that's the only hope you have, basically, is what he is saying. The world talks about the cross as foolishness, Christians as fools. But Paul's telling the believers, you think you got the world figured out on your own? You'd be much better off becoming a fool to the world and wise unto God, because otherwise, if you're wise unto the world, you are a fool unto God. And if I have to choose between the two, I'll take the one that rules all eternity and time. He goes on, for the wisdom of this world is folly with God. For it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. Please note, Paul is writing to believers. Okay, Romans is one thing. We can all go, well, yeah, that's for the unsaved, right? That's for the non-Christians. Paul turns to the believers in Corinth that were struggling with multiple issues, and he tells them the exact same thing. You may be saved, but your life is that of a fool, and your life efforts are futile if you live by the world's ways, the world's wisdom, and apart from the life surrendered unto Christ. See, the reason this Corinthian one is so powerful is because it is expressly to believers. He'll say, brethren. He's not talking about the lost anymore. He's talking about Christians that walk away. Christians that choose to live by the flesh, to live by their own plans, their own ways, their own strength, perceived strength in their own mind, their own perceived wisdom. The scary thing is there's not much difference in the description between the unsaved and a Christian who chooses to live apart from God's plans, God's ways, God's lordship in his life. I mean, yes, you have ultimately, you squeak through that little eye of the needle and make it in, through the flames into heaven, basically. But your life will have been futile. Your efforts, that which you have left behind, that which has mattered, that which you might have done, the lives you might have changed. Being a Christian doesn't mean we will choose to live a life surrendered to God. It just means we have the option now. See, the person described in Romans doesn't even have the option. They don't know Christ. They don't have the Spirit. Their life is futile. It is the life of the fool. It is the life in vain. In Christ, we can still live that life. The difference is we have an option to live differently now. We now have something else. Where it talks about futile lives, they became futile in their thinking. King James says vain in their imaginations, and that's not vain as in I'm so vain. That's vain as in vain, as in of no effort, no effect. It's try all you want. Your efforts will be in vain. That's what that means. The Greek origin of that is to be brought to folly in their thoughts. That in their mind, thinking them so wise, they've got all this figured out, they got life by the tail, can make their decisions on their own. It says they're going to be brought to folly in those thoughts. They're going to fall. They're going to nothing. It's going to collapse around them. The Corinthians word, when I read that just a moment ago, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. This is the wise in the world's eyes. Okay, this is the ones who think they're wise on their own. That word is the same word, where the origin means useless. or profitless. Their thoughts, their actions, their choices, their goals, their plans are going to be futile. They're going to be profitless. They're going to be useless. How powerful is this word futile to describe the life of the Christian who sets off on their own without Christ as the Lord of their ship, the captain of their ship, without Him at the wheel, making their own choice. How powerful is that word futile? In 1 Corinthians 15:17, this is the same word where Paul tells the believers, if Christ has not been raised from the dead, then your faith is futile. It's the same word. When he's talking about people who said, oh, there was no resurrection from the dead and everything else, he's like, yes, Christ has raised from the dead. That is the only hope of Christians. He said, in fact, if Christ was not raised from the dead, all of our faith, all of our religion, all of our good intentions, everything is futile. We have no hope. And that's the same word he says for those Christians who choose to live making their own plans, their own ways, on their own. Other places in Acts, this word is used, talking about people making sacrifices to other gods and things like that. It says, turn away from your vain or your futile things. It does you no good. It's empty. It's lost. I don't know about you, to me, futile is a horrible word. I mean, it's one of the worst I can think of, honestly. Futile. It says that no matter what effort, what resources, what good intentions are thrown at something, it is without hope. It is for nothing. It is futile. And that's what the Bible tells us our lives are like when we live according to the flesh, according to our own plans, our own goals, our own self-effort, our own confidence in ourselves apart from God and His ways and His words. Isn't that what Eve did, if you think about it? You know, I go back to her so often, but maybe that's because the Bible keeps pointing back to that moment as the root of sin in man. And I think, honestly, all of us are Adam and Eve. All of us have made the same mistakes and lies. But what did Eve do? She started to think too low of God and too high of herself. She bought the lie that she could meet her needs, that she could find happiness, she could find pleasure, she could find wisdom apart from God and His Word and His ways. So she set out on her own. Probably not thinking she was really doing anything that bad. I mean, truly, think about it. What is she doing? She's taking a bite of a piece of fruit. Really? See, God's always going for our heart. What was she really doing? Just saying, no, I don't trust you, God. I don't trust your word. I don't trust your character. I don't trust your love. I can do it on my own. Yeah, I've said this so many times, you guys could probably finish my sentences. But she looks at that tree and she sees that it's pleasing to the eye, desirable for food, desirable to make one wise. There's the three roots of sin that I know of. We think we can find wisdom or make good decisions. We think we can make ourselves happy, pleasing to the eye. We think we can meet our needs, desirable for food. And that's what Eve did. And I seriously doubt she thought she would be rejecting or walking away from her relationship with God when she did it. I really think she thought high enough of herself and low enough of God, maybe got too casual with God, I don't know what the root of it all was, but I really think she probably felt she could take the bite of that, she could do all this good, and she'd still be able to walk with God in the cool of the day in the garden. I really don't think she realized the ramifications of saying, I can do this without you. And God just going, okay. Okay. Go. Eve believed these lies regarding God's love, His words, His truth, lies about her own ability, and her subsequent decisions to do it her own way. It cost her and everyone down the line, her children, her generations, all that would spring forth from her, dearly. See, our decisions don't affect just us. Our decisions now are affecting our generations. What we do now is affecting our generations, our community. The face of this earth looks different for the decisions you and I make today. The ripples that go out from our decisions affect lives. And when we choose to live in the flesh, when we choose to make decisions and plans on our own, and when we choose to surrender to Him, and let His life through us, wow, both ways. We are incredibly amazing creations. The power that we have to alter and change things is stunning. What we can do with God when we surrender and His life and power and name are lived through us changes the world for eternity. Just like we have seen the utter horror and evil cast upon this world by people that have chosen to walk away from God and apart from God. Make no mistake, man is the crown jewel of creation. We were God's crowning jewel. We have been made in His image. Our capacity, the swath we swing, the ripples we send out, is huge. It matters what we choose. As we sit here, January 2nd, and look ahead with hopes, plans, setting goals. Pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life, thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Pain, futility, endless cycles of effort, exhaustion, all of a fruit of a life lived and goals made and pursued apart from God and a relationship with Him. Solomon, the son of David, he was known as the wisest man who ever walked this earth apart from Jesus. He wrote the book of wisdom, the book of Proverbs in here, an amazing book. Billy Graham used to, 31 chapters of Proverbs, he used to read one a day, go through the book every month. Incredible wisdom in Proverbs. You cannot even give Proverbs a cursory look without realizing a few things. One, God is the foundation of all knowledge and truth. Two, honoring God is first, making God Himself our highest goal and our most highest prioritized relationship is the foundation of every true path in life. God's leading and wisdom and direction come from placing Him and His heart first and trusting Him and His ways and leaning on His understanding and not our own. And wisdom is found only in God, and it is the fool who chooses any other path. That's just a quick, cursory glimpse through Proverbs. Those truths will just explode off page after page to you. Solomon would also write late in his life the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me read you just the first 11 verses of Ecclesiastes. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's the first verse. Now this word, the Hebrew word, root to this word vanity that he is using again is not, oh, I'm so beautiful. It is emptiness, transitory, unsatisfactory, and in vain. Okay? Emptiness, transitory, like here and then gone, unsatisfactory and in vain. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Guys, you're out there, ladies, you're out there working and working and working, and work is good. God has given us work. He's told us to provide for our families. He told us, but Solomon is just looking back on the life at the end, and he's going, what does man gain? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, and around goes the wind. And on its circuit the wind returns. All the streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. At the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with what was seen, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It's already been in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Then he skips a few verses and he goes to verse 14. You have that, Miriam? I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Vanity and striving after the wind, these are expressions he will go on to use repeatedly as he goes for 12 chapters, talking about how he deprived himself of nothing. He says, anything my heart desired, I allowed myself to have. He did it all. And he was rich. Right? I mean, there was nothing. He built one of the wonders of the world. Women, like 700 to 1,000 wives and concubines. Wine, wisdom. He tried it all. He said, I deprived myself of nothing I thought might make me happy, might have meaning. Man, striving after the wind. When he looked back on that life. And he gets to the very end of his book, Ecclesiastes 12, 13, 14. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Solomon summed his life up and he said, in the end, I have tried it all, and this is what it comes down to. Because God's got to be at the top. Because everything I tried on my own, in the end, was meaningless. Now, was he enjoying each of those individual moments? My guess is he was. My guess is he built that thing that became one of the wonders of the world. Like, whoa, am I good or what? I'm guessing he probably really enjoyed most of his wives and concubines. I'm guessing he enjoyed his wine. I'm guessing he loved it when people from all over the world traveled to hear his wisdom because he was known as the wisest man there was. But then each faded away. And in the end, he said, because one day I'll be gone and there'll be another king. And one day my gardens will be rubble and ruined. There's nothing new. The streams will keep flowing. The ocean will never get full. The sun will keep circling. The wind will keep blowing. It'll pass. You think about it. Now, if any of you can answer yes to these next two questions, you're really weird, okay? But who actually knows, could name all the Academy Award winners over the last 10 to 20 years? Super Bowl, NBA champions for the last 20 years? Think how many books have been written. I'm so proud to hold that book, see your name on the cover. Oh, Janice, you know that. I mean, bet when you got your first book, you just, I know when my dad, his first, or when Marianne and I saw the first cookbook come back, it just, when you finished your first quilt, Carolyn, it just, that amazing enclosed room you're building. Debbie, the crafts you've done, just, these things are so, in a generation or two from now, I got this little book, this used book I was buying for someone, and it was out of print. Stuck in the front page with a little note, "Mommy, I love you." Signed by Lizzie. At that moment, that was probably this precious gift and this thing and everything, and now it's in a thrift shop. Sold online, used. I have a friend who I just respect so much, just an awesome man of God. Every year on his birthday, he reads Ecclesiastes front to back. He just said it reminds him of what matters, and what's really important, what lasts and what doesn't. Doing life, making plans, setting goals, seeking meaning and happiness, apart from God and His will and His leading, it's in vain. It is futile. It is for fools. It is chasing the wind. It is here today and gone tomorrow. The Bible tells us of the things seen, they are temporary, and the unseen is that which is eternal. Now, all this would be really depressing news. Okay? I just said, okay, goodbye. Be blessed. See, if it wasn't for Christmas, this would be really, really depressing. Well, might as well walk out of here and say goodbye, because really, what does it matter? It's all meaningless in the end. Without Christmas, we could all make our plans, expend our self-effort, set our goals, seek our own wisdom, and find our lives futile, hopeless, empty of joy and meaning. For that is the effort of man apart from God. But we aren't apart from God. Galatians 4:4-7. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. We're not alone. Not just not alone, we're children of God. After this passage, Paul continues his words to the believers in Galatia. Again, to believers, people, please do not neglect the message this morning, which is this is not just for the lost. Most of these words are written to believers. The believers in Galatia had experienced the joy of grace. They had experienced the freedom of Christ. They had experienced the joy of the Holy Spirit living and reigning in their hearts. And then they started to slip back. They started to fall back into works and legalism and slip away from this joy, this grace. Christ at the center. He's done it all. And Paul wrote these next words to them. Verses 8 and 9. Please bring that up, Marianne. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? He's saying, people, you've tasted Christ. You've tasted His leadership and His lordship. You've tasted His freedom and His joy. how can you go back again to the weak and worthless? You might as well insert futile, because that's what worthless means. Elementary principles of the world. How can you let yourself be enslaved to them again? They're falling back, and whereas before Christ they were enslaved and had no choice, but now in Christ they do. They have an option. We have a choice. We are set free again to live in our created purpose, which is in relationship with God. His plans, His heart, His ways for us. And as we look and make our New Year plans and our goals individually, as a fellowship, as a family, as we do this, we must know that God's plans, God's ways, are the only antidote to futility in our lives. Unless we just think this was a hang-up of Paul's, Peter writes to the believers who are scattered because of persecution, the early church, and he writes, "Therefore, preparing your minds for action, being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But as He who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on Him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb, without blemish or spot." Miriam, please bring up 18 and 19 there. "Knowing you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with things like silver and gold, but with the blood of Christ, His life given for you." And what did it do? It took you out of the futile ways of your forefathers, those who did not know Christ, those who lived under the law, those who lived in darkness, those described in Romans. You've been ransomed from that, Peter's saying, so live differently. Live holy as He is holy. You were bought with His blood. You were bought with His life. And where He said, you do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. Back before you knew Christ, fine, all that stuff, who to expect anything different? If you don't have a higher moral authority in your life and absolute in your life, live like, even Paul said, live like crazy now because tomorrow we die. If Christ isn't raised from the dead, suck the marrow out of this life because it's all there is. Go for it. But now you know different. That was your futile ways. Pour it all into the passions of your flesh, and in the end you're going to see meaningless. But Peter says, but that's not you. You were ransomed from those futile ways. You were taken from your former ignorance. Now you know Christ. Now you've been purchased by Christ as His child. The child of God. Apart from Christmas, that is our life, former ignorance and futile ways. But Christmas came. That's not us. First Corinthians 2, 14-16. You have that. The natural person, the unsaved person, does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. You talk truths, try and share the gospel and things. They don't get it. They don't get why we can trust this book, why we can do these things. For they are folly to them. He is not able to understand them because they're spiritually discerned. This is why you and I cannot convert anyone. We can share the good news of great joy with people, but they have to have a meeting with Christ. They've got to be an encounter with the Spirit of God. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. For whom has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. Do you hear what that says? We, as a Christian, have the mind of Christ. What an encouragement from Paul and Peter. Do you hear what they're saying? They're saying, you don't have to live that way. Your life does not have to be futile. We have the mind of Christ. Proverbs tells us over and over, while it talks about the foolishness and the folly of those who don't put God first, who don't lean on His understanding, who don't seek wisdom, who don't, the foolishness and folly of those. It talks about that. But then Proverbs also says, for those who seek and those who put God first, wisdom is available. Wisdom is to be had. Wisdom cries out at the gate for us. Wisdom says, here I am, but here's the path. And there's only one. And that path is right through Christ. And not just at the moment of salvation, but a continuing decision to let Him guide us in our plans and hopes and goals and priorities. I find it incredibly encouraging that both Peter and Paul talk about our former ways, our former ignorance. Because that tells me I have a path to be set free from that. It tells me I have an option, a choice to not be like I used to be. I do fall back more times than I like to admit. I'm not proud of it. When Peter and Paul refer to our former ways and our past slavery to the flesh, they're reminding us that those are marks of what we were but don't have to be again. The Bible says there is no temptation that is too great that we do not have a way out through Christ. There is nothing you are facing, nothing you are choosing, no temptation coming your way that Christ says, through me you do not have the strength to say no. And He says, you have two paths. You can walk with me as the Lord of your life, or you can go a path of futility. And that might feel good for a minute. It might make you happy for a moment, but in the end you will look upon it and go, futile, futile. But in me you will create that which endures beyond this life and into the next. Because you have my mind, you are my child, you are my friend. And my resources are yours, and my strength is yours. And I am the only path to true joy, true meaning, and true purpose in life. You can pursue it all you want. Solomon did it. Got in a lot of trouble. David did it. Great men and women of God have done it. They've chosen to try it on their own. And eventually they hit rock bottom. And sometimes they take a lot of people with them. And sometimes there's time to turn back, and sometimes it's too late. Sometimes a decision can't be reversed. Sometimes there's no recovery. Sometimes we escape by the hair of our chinny chin chin, and God says, are you ready now? Here I am. Our choices matter. We have choices because of Christmas. I think I'm going to pause at this point. I don't want to rush the rest of this. I've given us a lot to chew on. But as you reflect, as you set your goals, as you look back, and as you look ahead, as we all do, individually, like I said, corporately, as a family, a couple, fiancés, high school students, looking and planning a future, people that have stepped through fire and just escaped. The message of the Bible is clear. And it is a message of good news and great joy and such hope. But it is a message that has to be responded to. And it says this: if you want to do it on your own, I will let you, he says. I created you in my image and I gave you free choice. And your choices will affect you, and they will affect people that love you and the people around you. I will let you try it every other way but me. I will let you think you can do it on your own. I will let you do that because I've given you choice. But I promise you that if you live to be a ripe old age, you will look back on a life lived apart from me, or just giving me lip service, and you will see that what your life has produced is futile, in vain, empty, and will not carry forth or across. Paul will write, and we'll look at this, God willing, next week. I'm not going to say we will, because I'm teaching on his plans and not mine, but I think we will next week. Look, but he will continue to talk to these believers in Corinth about you can build on no foundation other than that which is Christ. Okay, there's your salvation. There's your first step. But he's then going to go on to say, but then everything you build on that foundation is going to be judged. And you will see that which carries beyond into eternity, that which lasts, that which endures, that which has meaning, and that which is consumed by the fire. And who will step through that line with a life that carries with it rich rewards and blessings and things of eternal value and goodness that have changed the world for God and for others' lives? And who will step through as one escaping through the flames? The fleshly, carnal, pagan Christian life says, hey, I'm going to heaven, so I'm going to live for this earth now because I got my fire insurance. But the one who lays it down and said, Lord, it's January 1st, 2nd. Where do we go from here, Lord? Because you made me. You have plans for me. You think I'm amazing. You've seen all my brokenness and all my mistakes and all my faults and all my pain. And you still love me. You made me for a purpose. We are part of the greatest story this world has ever heard. I gotta skip to the end of my notes. Hold on. Sorry. I'm not letting you off the hook. Who's read the Narnia books? Show of hands. C.S. Lewis and Narnia. If you haven't, I highly encourage it. Don't write them off as kids' books. But you're going to get a spoiler here. Sorry. The very last words of the very last book, The Last Battle. Aslan the lion, he's got all these characters you come to love. And they basically die, and the series is over, and they crossed. And Aslan he spoke to them. As he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. So Lewis has slipped into his narrator voice. For us, the readers, this is the end of the stories. And we can most truly say they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. That is eternity in the hands of a master writer. That's what we live for. Hebrews chapter 12, Jesus endured the cross here for the joy that was set before him. In nothing am I saying that God does not want you to laugh does not have joy in store for you. He is not a killjoy. He is the source of joy. What I am telling you is that a life surrendered to him is not a life giving away joy. It is a life discovering joy. I have found in my life and in the lives of others and the biographies I have read that when someone pursues joy on this earth, pursues pleasure on this earth, you usually find neither. You usually won't get it. It'll be fleeting, and you'll have nothing that carries to eternity. But when you pursue eternity and fruits that endure, you get both. Because you start living in the purpose you were created for, and you find true joy on this earth. I believe with all my heart that Jesus, and even though the cross was ahead of him, and even though he was God and he'd surrendered all his rights as God, to live here, to be born in a feed trough, to give up his rights, to be mocked, ridiculed, rejected, scorned, exhausted, and weeping. I believe with all my heart he sat on that fishing boat and he sat around those fires and he enjoyed deep belly laughs with the disciples, that they told jokes, that they laughed. It said he was a man anointed with the oil of gladness more than all of his companions, it tells us in Hebrews. To follow Christ fully is not to surrender joy, it is to find it. As you look ahead this week, as you reflect back, let him be the center of your plans and goals. Let him, he's written the script, let him reveal it to you. Walk it out. You are an incredible piece that he has made, a treasured possession of him. He thinks you are so awesome. He died for you. He loves you. His heart beats for you. Zephaniah tells us he sings over you. He delights in you. He has woven a tapestry with you at the center of it. Your thread runs through it in stunning color. You are part of the greatest story ever told. And you are living in the pages of it now. You're living between the last of the epistles and the book of Revelations, because Revelation hasn't happened yet, and the rest has. You are being written. You are the living, written word of God on this earth today. You are the revealed image of God to those around you. Father, thank you. Thank you so much, Father, for your love, your goodness. Thank you, Father. Thank you for all that you are, all that you bring. Thank you. You give us an option to our former ignorance and our former futile ways. May we choose it. Thank you. Thank you for this fellowship. Thank you for smiles and laughter, love and joy. I ask that you bless us and lead us and guide us in this week and months and year ahead. That we would honor you. That our lives would glorify you. That there be a mighty kingdom harvest in this region. As we lay our lives at your feet and this region sees your image, your love, your likeness, your example. Ask for your favor, your hand, your power in our lives, physical and spiritual, in this coming year. Ask you to protect us from the attacks of the enemy and help us to stand strong with discernment and authority in the face of it. And this fellowship would grow closer and closer one unto another and unto you. That you would fill our ranks with the lost and the prodigals, not for the glory of true life, but for the glory of people. I thank you. I ask for your wisdom